Job hopping is often the only way underrepresented people get the titles or compensation they deserve. But also, job hopping is an indicator that a person is unwilling to tolerate abuse from employers. So, this is only a red flag if you are an abusive employer. A tweet by Ellie Armageddon. Hello, Toya Talks podcast listeners, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Toya Talks podcast. And as you know, we have a new episode every Tuesday. How have you been? How was the past week? How was your weekend? Guys, I'm really tired. I'm literally sat here with a strong double shot of coffee. I don't know why I'm so tired today, but I think it's because I'm thinking of all the things I've got to do this week, and I feel quite overwhelmed. I'm also going through my personal challenges with religion, and I have a podcast episode discussing religion, especially from a workplace perspective, because that's what we do here. We ensure that we create, give, motivate, and discuss tools for Black women to navigate the workplace and do so safely and successfully. That's what the Toy Talks podcast is about. But also we have open, frank, safe conversations about things that affect us as Black women in the world of work. And I think religion is one of them. I think religion is one of those topics that people don't necessarily talk about in conjunction with work, but you have those people who feel like their job is to evangelize in the office. And I think definitely even more so now that people are starting to return back to their offices, there's so many more things to explore and discuss here at the Toy Talks podcast. Before we get into the episode, there have been a lot of people that have written into me. I've had so many dilemmas, and I'm literally working my way through them. And I want to thank everybody who has written in hello@toytalks.com their dilemmas. If you want to send in your dilemma, you'll be kept anonymous. I discuss it, we go through it here on the Toy Talks podcast, and it gives people an opportunity to also hear the advice I give, but more importantly to understand that they're not alone in their dilemmas and sometimes their struggles in the workplace. As Black women, our struggles are completely different from our male Black counterparts, and of course from white people. And for me, it's so important that I come here and give you guys the tools that you need, because I feel like success is not reserved for a certain quota of Black people. Success is for all of us as Black people, and it's important that we share our successes, but more importantly, the journey to success. In the press recently, we've seen Adele, and whenever we talk about certain topics here on the Toy Talks podcast, I try as much as possible to also mention anything that's in the press that's related to or affects our Black culture. And Adele has really been bothering me. And I actually did an Instagram live about the whole Adele thing. So not an Instagram live, it was on my Instagram stories. If you don't follow me on Instagram, do so. My handle is Toya_Washington, or of course the Toya Talks podcast Instagram handle is Toya_Talks. So I was speaking to someone, and we'll talk about the Adele thing, and it was a fellow Black queen, and she said to me, my issue is I don't understand why as Black people we desire to reward white people for liking us, and she likens it to an inferiority complex. And I feel like if we just take the time for a few minutes to discuss the Adele situation. Now, Adele has that picture where obviously, Notting Hill Carnival has been cancelled, but she was celebrating, I'm assuming, with friends or people who basically gave her a pass to appropriate Black culture in the way she did. And she wore like a bra top, or just like a bra thing with the Jamaican flag, and then she had her hair in Bantu knots. And then obviously people just started like raising issue with it. And then during the Brandy versus Monica, or Monica versus Brandy, they showed like she had left a comment, and she had been speaking in patois, almost kind of taking the piss and making light of the fact that she'd been in the press accused of appropriating Black culture. Then we saw a few celebrities, Naomi Campbell, David Lammy, who's the MP for Tottenham in London, UK. And an MP is a member of Parliament, for those that don't know. And obviously the supermodel Naomi Campbell, and then Piers Morgan decided to make a comment as well, basically saying that it's okay for Adele to appropriate Black culture because she's from the culture. Now, my issue is this. Firstly, if Jamaican people have no issue with Adele appropriating their flag in a bra top, that's up to them. And I can't speak on that because I'm not Jamaican, I'm Nigerian. Now, if it had been a Nigerian flag, I would have something to say. The Bantu knots, and I think the problem that people have is that as black women, we can't, or we can wear Bantu knots if we want to, but we know what it comes with. Do you understand? Like, we can't pivot in and out of our black culture and our black skin. We are black people and we inhibit our culture. This is us on a daily. And I think people like Adele pivot in and out of black culture and take what she wants from it, but not necessarily understanding the gravity and applying some empathy in what she's doing. And it speaks to white privilege. Now, I understand, accept and appreciate what Adele has done in her career and how she has been very open to black culture. And part of it is because she's born and raised in Tottenham, which is predominantly black area. I grew up in Tottenham. So I know that she grew up in and amongst black people and black culture. But growing up in the culture doesn't give you an all access pass to appropriate black culture. But the problem is, because she's seen as an ally, and I definitely view Adele as an ally because there's a lot of things that she does for the black community and how she supports the black community, and that cannot, go unnoticed or unreferenced. But it's not a trade-off, i.e. as a white person, when you decide to use your privilege to support black culture, doesn't mean that you have a license to black culture. And this is what I spoke about in previous episodes. I think it's episode 8 or episode 10, season 1 of the Toy Talks podcast, where I talk about black allies, white allies in the black community. You need to really think carefully about people you ordain your allies, because when you do so, you give them an unfettered license and access to the black culture. And when you do that, you don't give them any boundaries or perimeters in which to appropriate black culture. Therefore, they appropriate it the way they want to interpret black culture. And it's often quite offensive. Now, I understand as a black woman how my hair affects white people. Yeah, you heard me. It affects white people. White people can have their hair in all different colours. They can cut it anyhow they want to. As soon as a black person does, it's seen as a declaration of something. It's seen as a form of protest. It is also seen as a point of conversation. So if somebody walked in, as a black woman walked in with Bantu knots, there is an issue. We saw Gracie, the young black woman that came into the office with her natural black hair, and we saw how, there were and ahhing, treating her like some type of, I don't know, African artifact that they were oohing and ahhing at. I spoke about that episode 5, season 1 of the Toy Talks podcast, about whether it's our responsibility as black people. Do we have a social responsibility to explain our natural hair in the workplace? Because I had to do an episode like that because it's gotten down to the granular detail of people's hair as black women, where we have to explain it. Like, if I was to say to Adele, where do Bantu knots come from? She can only tell me it comes from black culture, but she can't tell me anything else. And I think where black women and black people have really been annoyed at Adele is because the people around her that gave her the pass into black culture and have invited her to the cookout are doing so and almost feeling quite privileged and quite proud of the fact that, okay, she's done all this stuff for the culture, we'll reward her with some Bantu knots. But it doesn't work like that. And I don't think it's the place of a white man like Piers Morgan to tell us black people what we can and cannot accept and what we can and cannot interpret as black appropriation. A white person has no right to talk about the appropriation of black culture in any form when you still have our artifacts in your British Museum. I feel like it is high time as black people you start taking responsibility. We start taking responsibility for the passes we allow white people into our culture. And it is not acceptable. It is unacceptable for white people to appropriate black culture in a way that is almost mocking us as black people who are in our culture. This is what belongs to us. But yet we cannot we're not allowed to gracefully inhibit our culture and be able to go into the office with Bantu knots without being told it's unprofessional, without having our hair as a source of conversation, without being looked at as protesters making a stand when my hair is not a stand. My hair is what is naturally given to me. And I shouldn't be placed in a situation where I'm having to now think about everything else in relation to navigating the workspace and also thinking about how my hair affects my growth in the workplace. But that is the granular detail in which we as Black women have to navigate work that white people never have to. And I don't expect white people to understand, but I do expect them to understand that the appropriation of Black culture is not accessible to them. But I don't blame Adele. I don't. Do you know who I blame? I blame the people around her, the Black people around her that gave her the pass and allowed her to come to the cookout. And I blame us as Black people in general for thinking that we should be grateful when a white person is our ally. Why shouldn't they be our ally when really and truly the conversation we should be having is about reparations? Why should we be so grateful to have white allies when the reality of the situation is, if we actually think about and talk about what racism and slavery really is, white people owe Black people a lot. The fact that they have an economy, the fact that they have a structure is because of the Black blood, sweat, tears and slavery of Black people. But they don't want to have that conversation. Instead, they will pick somebody who they feel that they can literally berate and disgrace on national TV. And I said this on Instagram, I'm going to say it here too. Don't invite me to your TV shows. Don't send me emails asking me to come to your morning shows if you want me to discuss racism with white people. Because I no longer talk about racism with white people because I am not a historian, I'm not a history teacher, and I damn not a race relations lecturer. White people need to stop being lazy and therefore complicit in their own racism and unconscious bias. And rather than going to do the research and educating themselves, they yet still want to take from Black people, take that knowledge rather than going to do the work. Be proactive in your wokeness, white people, and stop looking for Black people to give you a pass. We are no longer inviting you to the cookout. You ain't coming to my motherfucking cookout. How can you come to my cookout? You can't even season your own food, motherfucker. You people can't even season and wash your chicken, and you want to be invited to the cookout. I am hereby revoking your pass to the cookout, white people. You ain't coming to no cookout. How can you come to the cookout when you don't even wash your meat? That's all I'm going to say about that. So this episode is called Open Office Showdown. Even more pertinent to the fact that, people are returning back into the offices. I don't understand. I don't know why we are doing that because we are still living in a very real pandemic. However, I feel like it is time that we start prepping ourselves for the possibility that a majority of us will be returning back to the offices, albeit the fact that I don't agree with it. And if any of you have any issues or are uncomfortable with returning back to work, I will be dealing with that later on in this episode and how to manage and deal with it with your employers, and try to find a compromise and middle ground in relation to returning back to work, especially as it has already been identified that people from the BAME community, in fact, I don't like that whole BAME thing, but that's what they, references us as. But people in the BAME community are more susceptible to contract coronavirus. Therefore, I think that is leverage enough to open the conversation and have dialogue about the conditions in which, as a Black woman, we are returning back to the office. But we will talk about that a little bit later on in this episode. So how many of you have Netflix? If you do, I need you guys to go and watch $1 Million Beach House on Netflix, because that is what this episode is actually based on. And specifically season 1, it only has 1 season, and it's from, I think, episode 1 to 6, so they don't have a second season. It's actually a short season, but a really, really informative season. And the reason why I've chosen to base this episode on episode 2 and episode 3 is because there is a brokerage, and in this brokerage there is a Black man, the only Black person and the only Black man in this brokerage, and his name is Noel. And there are 3 white men and 1 white woman. And what is really interesting is to see the dynamics between all of them. But what is more important, and what I need to draw your attention to, is how this Black man is treated. And before I kind of go into a lot of detail, I want us to examine Noel. Now, in episode 2, so episode 1 kind of introduces everybody, the normal stuff, the brokerage, how amazing they are, But in episode 2, everybody calls Noel Noel, right? And Noel, Noel, he has a twin brother, and his twin brother's name is Joel. So his twin brother, who doesn't work in the brokerage, apparently lives, I think, I can't remember where he lives, but he lives somewhere in Asia. But he has come to visit his brother Noel, because it's their birthday. Now, as the scene develops, they ask him, so Noel's colleagues asks his brother Joel, his twin brother, what is his name? Because we call him Noel. And his brother looks at him and says, his name is not Noel, his name is Noel. And in that moment, you can see Noel's mask kind of drop from his face. Now, the reason why that scene is so significant is because as Noel's character personality develops in this particular episode, we see him battling with imposter syndrome. Because when you know your name is something and you're changing your name, it's basically to conform to be more accepted by the white people. And Noel has a very awkward personality. And I get it, because when you first meet me in person, I can be quite awkward. And part of that comes from innate shyness. And equally as well, even though I am, seem to be quite outgoing, I'm what you call an ambivert. So I have outgoing, I have certain aspects and traits of an outgoing personality, but I can be quite introverted, and in certain situations I could just be really awkward. So people who have maybe seen me face to face, or I might be on the train, lifetime before, used to be on the train, and people say hello to me, I act all awkward. It's weird. And for a long time, I really battled to understand what that was. Was it social anxiety? And I think there is an element of that social anxiety, but it's just a little bit of awkwardness. Anyway, $1 Million Beach House, Noel. And it was really interesting as well, because I think as a black person, as black people, as we are, sometimes you go into organizations and you just want to fit in. And there's no shame in that, but you have to fit in by being yourself. And I think when it is discovered what Noel's name actually is, and that it's not Noel, as he had told him and introduced himself as, and had been known by, I think we then start to question, and we can see the other people in the brokerage that he works with start to question his credibility. Because if you are not who you say you are by name, what else about you isn't true? And as the episodes progress, you can see that he is being questioned, and his integrity is also being put to question. But what really kind of bothered me was more about, if you're going to go and work in a white dominated office, you need to know who you are before you get in, because a white man will tell you who you are. Because they will tell you who you are, and they will subdue you so that they can manage you, and so that you can be more palatable to what they are willing to accept. So already his credibility is being undermined. And what really bothered me about Noel was we see him kind of in his brokerage, and we see him actually doing a home viewing. And in this home viewing, this particular home viewing that he does is really interesting because of how it develops. And he didn't know the technical explanation for certain things. So the viewer was asking him, is this eco-friendly home? The technical stuff, and he didn't know his stuff, the functionality of the home. If you're going to work with white people, if you're going to be the only white person in a brokerage, in a workplace, you need to be the subject matter expert in what you do, because white people are very quick to tell you what they think is the truth, or to let you know that they're better than you. And I'm not sitting here saying you need to be better than white people, but you need to be better than white people. Yes, you do. When I keep telling everybody, I'm the subject matter expert in what I do, I think people seem to think that I'm trying to boast and trying to toot my own horn. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to let you know that I know my shit, because that's the type of confidence and knowledge I need to be able to work with white people who are constantly telling me, consciously and unconsciously, that I'm no good, or that I'm not good enough, or that they're better than me, or that I need to be in and amongst them to have any type of success, which is not true. But what really disappointed me about Noel was, as he's being questioned, and quite rightly so, by somebody who's about to spend millions of pounds or recommend a person to spend millions of pounds on a property. He doesn't know the basic functionality of that particular home. And that was now the foundation of what transpired in the open office, because the viewer that came to view the property was actually a client of the white woman who is called Peggy. So Peggy basically brought that person to Noelle's listing, and what would happen is on a commission basis she would basically get a bit of the commission because it's her client. Peggy has a chip on her shoulder because as white women working in a male-dominated industry, I feel like white women genuinely tend to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. And being a black man, I feel like white women, especially if a white woman is not trying to sexualize a black man, I definitely feel that they tend to have this superiority complex, and it has to be at the expense of a black man. And it just happens to be a black man whose credibility has already been undermined by the fact that he's not even telling everybody his real name, almost seeming quite ashamed of himself. But during that house viewing, and we see it on end of episode 2, episode 3, during the house viewing, the client had his glasses on. Noel had his sunglasses on. Noel had his sunglasses on as well. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. Noel had a level of confidence, right? So he should. He is out of his depth. So I get what he was trying to do. But the way that Peggy interpreted it was that the sunglasses symbolized pomposity. And this has basically led to her client criticizing Noel. And in that critique, she didn't take Noel aside when they were back in the office. She did it in the open office in front of the 3 white males in the office, knowing full well that number 1, Noel is the only black man. Number 2, that as a white woman, he knows that he can't really kind of attack her in the same way she's attacking him. And because no one else is saying anything, you watch Peggy literally rip Noel to shreds. So this happens in episode 3, which they've called, Netflix called it the evil twin. This is what I hate. This is what I cannot stand about white people. Anything good, they want to demonize it. They need to make it about good and bad. And usually what stands on the bad is black people. But they almost objectify white people as being good. And if you think about it, in society, things that are related to black, they put a negative spin on it. But the white is seen angelic, loving, almost an aspiration. So as soon as I saw that episode was called The Evil Twin, I was like, yeah, if he was white, they wouldn't be calling him that episode Evil Twin, but we digress. So the main showdown, the open office showdown, mainly happens in episode 3. And obviously, white women have to tap into their white fragility to further hone in the point that they're right. And she basically says in the open office that because of Noel's behaviour through the viewing, he could have lost her client, which is worth $1 billion. Now, imagine that being said in a brokerage in front of 3 white males. Obviously, they're looking at Noel sideways. So later on, when one of the white guys in the brokerage tells the story of what happened to another member of the brokerage who wasn't actually there at the time. Remember, the only people that were there when this actually happened, the house viewing and everything, was only Peggy and Noel. But for some reason, and I say for some reason, we know the reason, it's already assumed that Peggy is telling the truth. And exactly how Peggy said it is how it happened. Because then we watch one of the people in the brokerage called Mike retell the story to another member of staff outside of the office. And there's a particular word that he used when he was basically talking about what he believed happened. He said, when Peggy was basically putting Noel in his place, Noel was very submissive. As soon as I heard that word, I hit pause and I was like, this is basically white people 101 in the office. As long as black people are being submissive, we are behaving ourselves. As soon as we defend ourselves, speak, talk, explain our side, we are now being aggressive. As soon as we talk about what our truth is, we are being aggressive. So my thing is, had Noel spoken up for himself, those white men would have defended Peggy irrespective of however he defended himself. He could have been the calmest person explaining himself. He would have been pounced on. But because he was being submissive according to them, it was okay. And in a way, I blame Noel because his credibility was already undermined in a previous episode when his name was corrected. And yes, you know, I feel like during the house viewing, Noel shouldn't necessarily have had his sunglasses on, but he had it on, and so the person that was viewing the home had his sunglasses on. So in my head as well, and I feel like certain workplaces, so if you work for a brokerage, it is about lifestyle, and it is about almost being a bit performative to be able to sell a property. But I hated that the focus was more on Noel's appearance rather than actually where the problem lay. And the problem was his lack of knowledge rather than and I think Peggy, as a white woman, and white women do this very well, have a way of making them seem like the victim. This is how he made me feel. And not thinking once in a head that there's a professional way to address your colleague without having to have an open office showdown. Fully understand the impact of that scene, you're going to have to watch it. It's episode 2 and 3 of $1 Million Beach House on Netflix. And I think that when it comes to working in an open office, some people don't understand open office etiquette. They don't understand that you could be having a conversation with someone next to you and you better believe that half of the office can hear you. I feel like in that particular scene, we need to question what was Peggy's objective when she sought to disgrace him in an open office. And it was basically to draw attention to the fact that Noel's credibility had already been undermined. And now she wants to fully basically break down his self-esteem and let him know who the boss is. And white women have a particular way of doing this. I have worked in workplaces before where a white woman and I can see the same thing. And naturally you interpret it different, but the white woman will always put a spin on it to make herself feel better. I will never forget an organization that I worked in previously. And this particular white woman, Sarah, every time she'll come in the office, she's always got a problem. If it's not childcare problem, she's got a headache. If it's not a headache, she put the hot water on and then the cold tap came on. She always has a problem in it. And one particular day, she came in the office and there was hardly anybody there. And she said to me, Toya, I'm under a lot of pressure at work. And she used to sit behind me. And in my head, I'm like, why is this woman telling me? But white women, for them, pressure, they can't deal with any type of life pressure. Not understanding that black people and black women go through pressure daily, and the actual pressure that we go through and the trauma that we've had to deal with to be able to sit at the back of you or sit in front of you. We are still unpacking trauma, but I sat behind her so she felt like she can come and offload in it. And she said to me, you know what, Toya, I can't do this anymore. I feel depressed. So I said to her, if you feel like this, you need to go and speak to our head of department and ask for some time off. Do you know that she went and had that conversation with the head of department and she got the time off? Yeah, you heard me. And in the kitchen, I don't know what Sarah was doing in the kitchen or what she was saying in the kitchen, but I remember going to get some water. And although it wasn't an open office, it was sectioned off, but the kitchen is an open kitchen. And I don't know what a member of staff must have said to her. This woman, literally, she launched at this guy. And I sat there and I was like, if this had been a black woman, I guarantee you that person would be asked and instructed to go to HR. But this woman was pampered. She basically humiliated the guy because apparently that when he was using the water tap, he splashed her. She went mad. And I don't give a damn. When a white woman is going through anything, it is the worst thing on earth. And people can say, oh yeah, but you know, she's stressed and depressed. But if you think about it, she's only stressed and depressed because she got to do work. All of us are stressed and depressed in the office. But white women are mollycoddled and they're spoken to so gently. But black people, we are dealt with a level of aggression that is not expected to then be responded to in the same aggression. And it places us in a very difficult situation as black people. It does. And as black women, I feel even more so. An open office environment places us in a very difficult situation. And this is the reason why we have to be very conscious and intentional about how we approach open office. Now, first and foremost, if you know you are a minority in an office, which we generally are, you need to know your shit. Don't go moo-mooing yourself in a situation whereby you should know your stuff and you have fallen short, because anything that then flows from it is your responsibility. But in dealing with an open office, you need to firstly understand that you're constantly under the microscope. And that can be a lot of pressure. But equally, that works to your advantage because you're already aware that you are under the microscope. Don't allow yourself to be bait for white people in the open office. Sometimes people have deliberate conversations in the office to make you look stupid or to draw attention to sometimes things and situations where you have fallen short. And it's about how you recover. There's certain conversations people will have with you and just say, you know what, this is not the right time to have this discussion. Should we talk about it a bit later? Diffuse and walk away. I never agree with having an audience because the problem is perception. You can't control people's perception in an open office. But you know what you can control? How you respond. I remember in an open office and there was a particular girl that I worked with in my team. And I had asked her, and she was basically the admin person in the team, and I had asked her if she could print something out. And I'd asked her this the day before. So the next day now, she still hasn't done it. So I said to her, I kind of need that thing, like now, if you wouldn't mind, could you do it for me? And there was nothing wrong with what I said. I hadn't raised my voice. It was just a normal request on a normal day. Do you know that this girl went to my boss and said that I shouted at her in the open office? Luckily for me, and I say luckily for me in a sense that I knew that I hadn't done but she just didn't like to be asked to do anything. She doesn't like anybody asking her to do her job. Like, she had this superiority complex that came from nowhere other than her inability to understand that she was a junior member of staff. Anyway, when my boss had told me this, I asked my boss who was the witness. Since I was shouting in an open office, there should be a lot of witnesses. My boss couldn't tell me nothing. I said to her, this conversation is done. Because unless you can prove to me that I shouted at her, this is just this particular person's opinion based on the fact that she hadn't done her job properly. So rather than focus on me, I think the focus needs to be, why didn't you do your job? Why has someone got to ask you twice to do something that is routinely part of your job? When I said this to my boss, she was confused. But she knew what I was saying. And I understand from my boss's perspective where she felt like she had to have that discussion with me to appease this girl. But if you're going to come to me, come with facts. Don't come with emotion, because I can't do anything with that emotion. But in that situation, I think one of the main things I learned is when you're in an open office, people do certain things to provoke you, even more so to have witnesses. And you've just got to understand that not every conversation that people are trying to draw you into is a conversation about that particular topic, but rather it is an example that somebody wants to use to basically support something negative or to create a perception. Perception is so important. And in an open office, perception is something that is subjective. And you've got to understand the dynamics of open office and understand the open office politics. In that particular situation with that girl, yes, I mean, when I think about if I could have handled it differently, I would have handled it in the same way. But equally, that could have gone left if I was actually shouting at her or being disrespectful to her. And in an open office, she knew exactly what she was doing when she was questioning why I needed that particular document or, but the thing is, there was hardly anybody there, and even more so to my benefit, I was able to say to my boss, I actually asked her this thing in the office and there wasn't many people there. If there were, she would have been a lot more embarrassed. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you here? So in $1 Million Beach House, you could see that for Peggy, it was more about creating an audience for Noelle's humiliation. I think that when you actually have the opportunity to look at this episode, I think it's really important that you understand that as a black man, Noelle was put in a very difficult situation. It was actually quite difficult to watch because the audience and the backdrop were the people that he worked with. And the person that was basically commanding the disrespect was a minority as well. And she's a minority in the fact that she was the only woman. But being the only woman was to her strength, because she now realizes, being a white woman and being the only woman, she had a level of dominance over Noel. And I think he did handle it the best way he could. I felt like any other way other than being a bit more passive would have been seen as aggressive. And actually, if he wanted to put her in her place, he doesn't necessarily need an audience. He could take her aside and do that. As the episode progresses, what we tend to see is the development of Peggy's personality, the white fragility, the often patronizing and humiliating way of dealing with things. But more importantly, how she allowed her emotions to get the better of her. Because in episode 4, they decide to do like a team building on a boat. And you see the other members of staff trying to find and make peace with Peggy and Noel. And Peggy is holding true to her guns and she's relentless. And Peggy is almost manipulative to the point where the other people in the boat are like, well, why don't you just want to make peace or find common ground? And what I really loved about episode 4 was the fact that Noel could see that Peggy's position was weakened by her inability to take herself out of her emotion and be professional. And what he did is use that situation to his advantage. So rather than meeting her where she is, he took the moral high ground. And in that particular scene, it was fantastic because all the other members of staff actually rose to Noel's defense. And the person who was on the outs was the white woman, the manipulative, fragile, egomaniac. But if you want to see white women in the workplace, just go and watch episode 4, episode 3, episode 2 of $1 Million Beach House. You know, when I talk about navigating the workplace strategically, it's also about picking your battles. Not every battle in the workplace needs to be fought at the time in which the battle occurs. And I think it's also important to understand what your leverage is in an office environment, especially in an open office. And from a remote perspective and working remotely, I think for those people who have been in workplaces before the pandemic, you already know where you stand in your workplaces. And now the emphasis is now on instantaneous communication, video conference calling. It's now about, I feel like you're being scrutinized more that you're away from the office. It's about the language you use to communicate. It's about how you communicate and reading between the lines of emails of people who don't necessarily have your best interest at heart, but want to instigate. There is always an instigator that will not necessarily play by any other rules other than what benefits them. There are people who think to get to the top, they need to create trouble, stand back and let the trouble brew. Sometimes you have to allow people to fall on their own sword and understand that there is a bigger picture and not all battles need to be fought. There are things in the office that I have ignored and I just note it down on my note it down on my burn folder. It's not everything that happened that I react in that moment. You have split second decisions to make at any given time when something happens, and there are certain questions in that split moment, that you have to think about. And the first thing is, what is really happening here? What is my expected reaction? How do I actually feel about this situation? And what is the bigger picture? Those are the 4 questions you need to be asking yourself at any given time in a situation that happens. I feel like this pandemic is causing people to be a bit more cheeky, show their hand a little bit more. And one thing about white people is they're really good performers, but they're really extremely bad liars and fakers. White people, I feel like their blueprint is the same. So being fake is very obvious when they're being that way. And often believing what you see in their behavior. You have to ask yourself, is it strategic for me to react right now? And if it is, what is that reaction going to be? And I think that there is a lot of emphasis on Black people having to be submissive and calm. And I don't necessarily think submissive is the way to go. Being calm is, and being logical is, and removing emotion is important, because white people, I feel, are constantly emotive. They bring all their issues into the office. If they're having a period, they'll let you know. If their child didn't blow their nose in the morning, they'll let you know. White people, I feel, don't understand what struggle and pain and upset is. So any slightest thing to them is massive. Whereas as black people, we know what the bigger issue is and bigger picture is. We know where we've come from to be able to sit in the offices with these people. If you're looking for your white colleagues to respect you, unfortunately, white people are very fickle. And I think if you actually drill down to what they view as respect, your idea of respect and theirs is incompatible, because respect for them comes from submission, and for us respect just comes from fairness, I'd like to believe. And I speak for myself when I say that for me, I feel like in order to be able to be the best that I can be as a professional, I need to see a level of fairness, and that fairness is only going to come from how I strategically maneuver and meander the workplace. With white people, I genuinely think that they have a superiority complex that comes from their white privilege, and therefore black people, I think, and especially with the white people I've worked here with, they see black people as an obstacle to their privilege, especially black people who are educated and seasoned. And when I say educated, it's not necessarily education, it is also experience that comes from being able to take certain positions and being able to be seen. I think with a lot of black people I've worked with, I think a lot of our problem has been being seen, versus white people who are seen automatically because they're white. And I feel like to be seen doesn't mean you have to scream the loudest. You just have to know your shit. It's really that simple. White people don't necessarily have to know their shit. How many white people do you know in your organization that are senior, have never done any type of formal education, don't necessarily understand how they got into the position themselves, but they're there? And it's this thing, and I read this thing where it says when we are applying for jobs, it's almost like we have to satisfy 100% of the application, whereas white people, they don't even have to satisfy 20%. They just have to be white. Do you know how many people I've worked with that are white that have no business being in certain roles, or I look at and I'm like, how did you get here? And they say, I've just worked my way up. No, you've just whitened your way up. You have whitened your way up. You haven't worked your way up. White people don't know how to work their way up. Who you know? Being white, that's all a privilege that black people don't have. Because as black people, we should know our place, right? And our place to white people isn't sitting next to them, it's sitting below them. And this is the reason why I say you have to know your shit, or be on the trajectory of knowing your shit. And the aim should be to be a subject matter expert so that you could be better than that white person. That white person needs to look at you and think, I need this person on my team to hide the holes of me not knowing what I'm doing here. Listen, when you know your shit, you're able to make white people look good. They see you as an ally. But you're not a real ally. You're only worth something insofar as you're able to make a white person in a senior team, in a senior leadership role, look good. I know that. I know for a fact that I've worked in many organizations where they see me as an ally, they see me as a colleague, because I know more than them, and I'm quite happy to play the role to make them look better. Because for me, the bigger picture isn't about me being better than them. It's about me being able to elevate to a certain level and be able to get to a senior role. But the thing is, I've also found that whenever I've left roles, it's because I've reached a ceiling, and usually that ceiling is just below the level of that senior manager that I make look good, because that senior manager can't afford to have me on the same level as them, because then I'll be identifying where they fall short. And at that point, I know it's time to leave. I feel like when you are in an office, there's an etiquette that needs to be adhered to, and it's a level of professionalism. And that professionalism isn't to be subdued. That's not what I'm saying. It's just understanding that the politics in the workplace is more than you. And whether you want to or not, you have to play the office politics. As soon as you decide to be employed by a certain organisation, you're a politician. I've told you guys this before. And although you may not want to play the office politics, you're forced to. Because if you do not play the politics, you will sink. They will manage you out and they will get you out. And you have to understand what role it is you're playing. I never am part of a clique. I don't believe in part of office cliques, because cliques turn and change very quickly. I am very neutral in so far as I can go to lunch with anybody. I kind of meander in and out of groups, in and out of, but equally I stand on my own because I know that no one's going to have my back more than me. So I don't depend on, or expect anything from my colleagues. I have a high expectation of myself. So when I am in an open office and people are doing certain things, I know what the bigger picture is and I know what their goal is. And this is why when I go into organizations, I spend a lot of time literally observing. There's workplaces that will tell you I'm really quiet. I'm not quiet. I just know how to navigate properly. I don't need to talk. I don't need to be heard all the time. But when it comes to my job, I can't have someone tell me how to do my job when you can't even do your own. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is why I say to you, like, being a subject matter expert takes time, but more importantly, it's what you get out of being a subject matter expert. You become the authority. Your credibility comes from what you have been able to deliver. And the person you put forward, in any workplace, I'm able to do my due diligence and do my assessment and know which aspect of my personality I'm going to allow to shine in an office. And equally, I understand when I'm being set up. Yeah, the signs are there. And there's always that one person that wants the glory. And you have to understand that some battles are meant to be fought tomorrow or next year. It's not necessarily meant to be fought now. And you've got to understand that, especially when you're working with white people, a lot of them have a motive. When people are capitalizing on things that are quite trivial, what is the motive? Is it to humiliate you and undermine your credibility? Is it to poke holes in your ability to do your job? And you've got to see this coming a mile off. And the only way you're going to do that is understanding the politics of where you work, understanding the rules, the professional rules of open office, and more importantly, understanding the white people you work with. You have to spend time doing that. And sometimes it can come through a situation, it can come through people trying to or attempting to throw you under the bus, but how do you recover from that? And it's not by being the office telltale tip. It's not by licking arse. It's literally by nailing your job and being the best in class of what you do. Sometimes an open office showdown is unavoidable. Sometimes you can be caught off guard and just be in your emotions. And it doesn't mean that you are a failure. I hate that F word. It doesn't mean that you're weak. Sometimes situations happen. I definitely know when I was a lot younger, I always fell into the white traps. Always fell into them. Until one day I realized that I'm falling into these traps because I'm unwilling to understand that it's not about winning and losing. It's about navigating and getting what I want out of a job. And rather than put my emotions on Front Street, it's about sometimes understanding that you can't always walk into the office with emotion, because as Black people, they take and desensitize us. They take and strip us of any emotion. So therefore, when we're showing emotion, it's just automatically seen as aggressive and negative, because that's part of their unconscious bias and how they treat Black people. When Peggy and Noelle were having their office showdown, Peggy said something and she says, "This is how everybody feels about you." And she was basically being negative. And she goes, "Everybody feels this way about you." That line is to divide and segregate, but it was an important line because it wasn't like anybody piped up and put her in her place. I genuinely believe that when you walk into an office, you have to walk in with your superhero kit. And part of your kit includes being able to deal with the deplorable way in which white people deal with Black people. And sometimes it's not necessarily how they deal with you. It could be how they deal with other Black people. And we have to be able to learn. We have to be able to decipher and discern. Remember, we had that episode about discernment and using your judgment. But if you've fallen in the trap and you find yourself in a very difficult situation where you are now arguing publicly with a member of staff, you have to understand that you are now in a very, very, very volatile situation, because Black people are always seen in the wrong. Not every time, but more time than not. And it's about now, what are you learning from that situation? How did this person manage to get you into an emotional state where you are having an office showdown, where you are now vulnerable to public perception And that perception, depending on the prejudices and the biases in people's minds, will be against you. How are you recovering? What have you now put in place to protect yourself from such situations? How are you critiquing your management of a situation that you found yourself in and it caught you off guard? You should never be caught off guard by your white colleagues. And that includes management. They shouldn't catch you off guard. If your white colleagues are constantly catching you off guard, it's because you are not observing. You are not learning. And more importantly, you are not being conscious about how you are navigating work. And unless you approach work with a level of consciousness, I promise you, you are always going to be in the thick of problems, in the middle of issues, and you're going to find yourself working in organizations where you can't stay there for long. I have a couple of aims for the Toy Talks platform, and one of those aims, especially after watching $1 Million Beach House, was that I really want Black women to feel supported, because often we're walking into the lion's den of the workplace and we're not feeling that support. And I think that's predominantly the reason why Black women are very defensive in the office and are engaging in certain things in the office that is really detrimental to your careers. I want it to be a case that the support that you feel in navigating the workplace comes from the Toya Talks podcast and platform. And I understand the very vicious and often aggressive nature of workplaces whereby you are the token, or maybe in your minority in that there's not many of you. And then you're walking into the workplace and it feels like the unknown, and it feels volatile and it feels aggressive. And I'm not asking or even trying to diminish how intense that is. And I'm not asking you to pretend like it doesn't exist. What I'm asking you to do is to find a way to navigate the workplace where you are not vulnerable. And that often comes from understanding what makes you vulnerable in the workplace. Getting into intense arguments that get personal, or participating in the traps of aggression that white people set us up into, is just not the way to do it. There's a way to have professional arguments with people without necessarily feeling or making yourself the target. And sometimes when it's professional, it's the way you put things across. So if it's in an email, it's the way you say certain things. So my favorite line is, please, can I draw your attention to, for the avoidance of doubt, to reiterate my further point. It's the way you say things. And I definitely feel as though people make assumptions about Black women already. And it's often that we're fighting something that has already been concluded. But I never want people to see the white workplace as a fight. I don't see it as a fight. I see it as an opportunity for us to challenge what makes us uncomfortable and turn it into our success story. So everything and every episode on the Toya Talks platform is to provide you with your success story. It's to aid and support you as you navigate the world of work, and to understand white people are not your enemy. I genuinely believe that with white people, it's that colonial, ancestral thing that they have within them to feel like their job and part of their role is to oppress Black people. We are now living in the era of Black Lives Matter. You need to start utilizing what is happening to be your platform for a voice, to be your platform of comfort. Navigating the workplace isn't easy, but being able to be confident in what you are doing comes from your ability to understand, number one, the importance of being a subject matter expert, but equally to understand that white people are not your friends, darling. Especially in a white dominated industry where you are the minority, white people are not your friends. You just have to find a way to work with them. And this is what I'm trying to teach you guys, is the way to manage white people so that you can get what you want. I'm telling you, every time in my career where I have been promoted, any time in my career where I've been given and afforded certain opportunities, white people have opened that door for me. Every single time. I don't think there is one stage in my career that is profound or that a door has been opened that it's been at the hands of a Black person. It really hasn't. And part of that is because the most influential roles and the roles of influence and power has been held by white people. But if I'm able to open those doors, and those doors are able to be opened by white people, that means that I have to have navigated the workplace successfully enough for the white people to not see me as a threat. And this is why I talk about success is not necessarily assessed monetarily. For me, I assess my success based on how I'm able to manage and navigate white people to get what I want. And each and every stage, I've gotten what I want. I may not have been able to take the conventional route, but the route I've taken is still basically giving me dividends. So managing white people also comes from how you view yourself and understanding the position in which white people see you, and being able to say, I'm okay with that. I'm okay if a white person sees me in a certain way, especially when I know that's not the way I am. I'm not trying to convince white people of my blackness and of who I am. I allow my work to do the talking, because if I'm going to be a subject matter expert in what I do, I'm going to be the best in class at what I do. And being the best in class means you're going to see me by all costs. But what I'm not going to do is participate in the bullshit that white people thrive on. That's not what we're not going to do. Anyway, as I draw this episode to a close, I really hope you guys go ahead and watch $1 Million Beach House on Netflix, and really go and have a watch of it. It is really profound. Tell me what you've learned. If there's something you want to discuss or want me to explore further as part of that series, then let me know. But it's definitely an episode that I will encourage, definitely a program I will encourage my black sisters to go ahead and watch. So moving on slightly, obviously you guys know I'm writing my book, and writing a book as a dyslexic black woman is very interesting, and I am actually charting the difficulties I am encountering. I did speak about this on my Snapchat. My Snapchat handle is Toya Washington, all one word, and I was talking about like some of the challenges that I feel that I'm going through to be able to deliver this book. But those challenges are honestly going to be my testimony, because I genuinely believe that this book I'm writing is going to transform lives, as has the Toy Talks platform. But the book is really going to bring everything together, and it really gives people an opportunity to understand how the workplace has worked for me and how I've navigated the workplace. It's also an extension, I believe, the book is an extension of the podcast. So I'm definitely really excited for you guys to read that. And I'm hoping that it will be released in 2021, because 2020, I'm so sorry, 2020 is cancelled. 2020 is cancelled. Like, I definitely, the book isn't ready anyway, but even if it was, I wouldn't be releasing it this year at all. Also as well, like I said in the beginning of the episode, that I've been receiving a lot of dilemmas, and I'm working my way through them. So I'm hoping next week's episode will be a dilemma. But if you are wanting to send me a dilemma, then email me at hello@toytalks.com, and I will be more than willing to be able to discuss and advise you on your dilemma. Also as well, October is actually my birthday month, which I'm really excited about. Well, I say really excited insofar as one is celebrating another year of life. But October is also Black History Month. So people like me, I say people like me, God, I only made one of me, but you know what I mean. Black activists like myself are busier, I believe, during Black History Month, because these white organisations that want to tick a box of being compliant with race relations book people like me to come and speak in their organisations. Not all organisations. Some organisations really do believe in what minorities, especially Black people, are going through, and really want to educate the wider organisation and make them aware, and also just create some knowledge and book people like me who speak on what needs to be spoken. But we're really busy during Black History Month. But the reason I mention it is, don't do anything for free, please, especially when organisations are seeking to download what you have to offer to benefit their white colleagues. We need to be paid. There is a budget. There is a budget that needs to be opened up for Black women or Black people to go into these organisations and educate them. And I don't do anything for free. No, I don't do anything for free anymore, because the way I look at it is, if an organisation needs to be more aware about racism, and educate themselves on Black Lives Matter, and they need to tap into what I offer, then they're placing value in what I offer. And placing value also means monetary value. So I think it's always important during Black History Month and beyond that as Black people, we know our value and we quantify what that value is. And we are comfortable with the uncomfortable discussions about money. Let's get comfortable with talking about money. White people are not ashamed to talk about money, you know. They just hope that we're ashamed enough to not have to shame them into discussing the money that they don't want to spend. So listen, I'm going to draw it to a close, you know, because I feel as though the things that needs to be spoken in this episode have been spoken about. I'm going to give you an opportunity to digest what I've shared in this podcast episode. And I want to thank you for listening to the episode to the end. I also want to thank you guys for supporting the platform the way you do, recommending it to people that at me and recommend the Toy Talks podcast and platform on social media. I really appreciate you. You know, in order for Toy Talks podcast and platform to be recognized and spoken about in rooms where I'm not in, it depends on and is dependent on you guys sharing and being open enough to recommend the Toy Talks podcast and platform to people who don't know about Toy Talk. So I definitely appreciate you guys. If you want to follow me on social media, then please follow me on Twitter. My handle is Toya_W. My Instagram handles are Toya_Washington and also Toya_Talks. If you want to follow me on Snapchat, my handle is Toya Washington, all one word. I've recently received a lot of messages on social media about how to approach negotiating salary, CVs and stuff like that. And you guys know that, follow me, that know that I have a website, www.toytalks.com. And on that website, I have masterclasses, a CV masterclass, negotiation masterclass. I try as much as possible to make sure that I have masterclasses that you guys can utilize. I definitely know that I need to do a redundancy masterclass, and that is in the works. But please, if you want to know how to do your CV, how to apply for public sector, private sector jobs, go on to the masterclasses. They're really, really useful. The feedback has been absolutely fantastic. And I'm not going to advise people how to navigate, how to negotiate salary if I know that I've got a negotiation masterclass on the Toy Talks website. Go ahead, purchase, download, and learn. Add to your knowledge and be great in your workplaces. And I want you guys to feel confident as you navigate the world of work. And that's why I have the masterclasses available on toytalks.com. I want to thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Toy Talks podcast. I will see you again next week, Tuesday. Be safe, self-care, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week. My name is Toya Washington, and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.